Okay, good evening, everyone. And this is our final share, just because of the calendar. Fortunately, creeps up on us. I just again want to mention that I'm living now with this series in fear of plagiarizing, because this book that I discovered just before starting has impacted so heavily on what I'm saying. The quick plug for this book by someone called Moshe Miller, I guess he's a Rabbi Moshe Miller, about the book of Ruth. You should be able to find it on Amazon. And a lot of what I'm saying, I brought it along this time to show everyone. A lot of what I'm saying is has now become taken over by. He says a lot of the stuff I was thinking, and then much more, much better. So it's also been taken over a little bit by that, for which I apologise. Just to remind ourselves, we spoke about Boyaz. Right near the ends of last week, the bigger themes we were looking at were the themes of Rus, which is this transition to Malchus, Chesed, Yibum, which we're going to revisit again this week. Yibum somehow relinking the broken chain, and we looked at the character of Boaz, who demonstrates an Uzus. He has a Uzus is the Mishnah Novus that we read actually last Shabbos says on the one hand, have uz kaneme. Az doesn't mean strength; it means almost chutzpah or cheek, or boldness. Gibor kari, the lion is the strongest of the animals, but the leopard has a boldness and a cheek associated with it, as is well known. Leopards will attack even far stronger animals. Uzus is a great midah, however, it's also a dangerous midah. Then the very next Mishnah says, Az panim legehinnom, someone who is a cheeky mechutza for chutzpah who doesn't know their place and their role is that's also a dangerous sort of arrogance. So Boyaz has this midah of Uzus. It's not even his name; it's his pseudonym, his nom de guerre, the name he adopts to represent the spiritual mission he sets for himself. He's really Ivtson, according to Chazal. He's one of the shoftim, and we spoke about how boldness needs to be balanced with tradition, the two pillars of the Beis Hamikdash, Yochin or Boyaz. But either way, Boyaz is a revolutionary of sorts. We find in the Megillah one of his revolutions, which is introducing the idea of greeting everyone with the name of Hashem. Not a simple idea. The name of Hashem is meant to be treated with awe. And yet, the Mishnah explains to us that Boaz introduces, it meets everyone with his name, Yud Kei Vav Kei, under the rubric of Eis La'asos La'Hashem, Heferus Osacha. There's a time to do for God, even though it involves annulling the Torah, very, very rare application of an amazing principle that very occasionally the leader of a generation can suspend a halacha in order to fulfill some greater good. Very, very scary idea and needs a lot of analysis of its parameters. But Boyaz does that. He says, even though the name of Hashem is so powerful that we're not meant to use it the whole time, in our God-forsaken age, we need to start reusing it again. And it's a fairly well-known Mishnah, but what we don't stop and think about is what was so terrible about this era of history that Boaz felt he had to re-bring Hashem back into the picture. And hopefully we've understood a little bit about what's so terrible about this era of history. This is Shafot HaShoftim, the time when the judges are being judged. This is the time when when there's such chaos that Klal Yisrael ends up doing an action, a Sodom-like action that we discussed in earlier weeks, the terrible story of the Pelegesh Begiva. This is a time when the leaders of the generation run away to Moav, of all places, to the place where Lot stems from, where Sodom stems from, to the place where the Moavites didn't come out to greet us with bread and water. This is a terrible time in Jewish history. And Boaz says, it's time for a revolution. I'm going to turn things back. And amazingly, I'm going to take acts of bold leadership. I'm the shofet, and I'm also going to do small things, as it were, in day-to-day discourse, in which people will greet each other with the name of Hashem. So this is where we were up to. Now, what we're now going to look at is after Rus encounters Lot for the first time. Sorry, after Rus encounters Boaz for the first time, she comes back to Naomi. And Naomi is amazed by what's happened, and she begins thinking maybe Boaz can be a goyel for us. A goyel is a redeemer. Redeeming Geula has resonance in our ears, right? The redeemer, Mashiach. The redeemer here is a small reconnection of a ruptured link. It's a redeemer of restoring land to a family who have lost their place in Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael means Eretz Shel Yisrael, the land of the Israelites. It means it only has the full kedusha of Eretz Yisrael when Yoshve'ah Yoshveha Oleha, its inhabitants are living on it. This is a halachic fact that the full kedusha of Eretz Yisrael, in terms of trumas and masfis and other things, is only when Yoshveha Oleha, when we are living there, when we are connected to it. Without that, it loses some, though not all, obviously, of its sanctity, of its kedusha. So it's Eretz Yisrael, and the optimal manner in which Klal Yisrael live there are in the allocations of each tribe living in their place, and within the tribe, each family nestling in their role, almost reproducing the sort of machne of the travel through the midbar, in which each tribe had its place, and they traveled around the Mishkan, now supplemented by the permanent seat of Yerushalayim, though this hasn't yet happened until David HaMelech. So returning a family to its place, which is task number one of the Goyel, that this Redeemer is going to have to do, as we know from the continuation of the Megillah, is a small act of Geula, which restores Eretz Yisrael ultimately back to the full Goyel. The second act of the Goyel is Yibum, which is going to be reconnecting the broken family lineage. Again, there needs to be a continuation, a shalsheles, a chain, a linked chain through the generations, and that's the second thing the Goyel is going to have to do. We are aware in the story, and that's really the whole point of the story, that in the little acts of Geula that Boaz does for us, i.e., one localized family reconnecting its lineage and reconnecting to its land, will give birth to the ultimate Goyel, Moshiach, who reconnects the whole of Klal Yisrael to the lands and reconnects the whole chain of Masorah, of tradition. So that's where the rest of the story is going to go. That's the headlines of the rest of the story. So Naomi, she's not thinking about this big picture, that this is going to be the Geula of Klal Yisrael is going to emerge from this, the Davidic dynasty. She's just thinking locally, this is a solution to restoring my family. I've come back from Moav empty, as I said to the women of Beis Lechem, she says. And now, wow, what an amazing fortune that you have happened to encounter Boaz when you went to glean in his field, and maybe he'll be a goyel for us. And now she gives an amazing and unusual set of advice to Rus, and we're going to read this inside shortly. And she suggests to Rus what in any other circumstances is the most inappropriate behavior imaginable. She basically says to Rus, in some shape or form, I want you to propose marriage to Boaz. And even that language is a little purer than the story sounds. She says to Rus, dress up in your finest and go and encounter Boaz in the threshing floor, out in the lonely fields where he is sleeping, spending the night. And out of that, maybe restoration of our family lineage will occur. So this is a shocking story that's going to happen. Chazal are sensitive to the nuances of this story, and we're going to look at why there's this sort of shocking development over here. What does Naomi think she's saying to Rus about Boaz of all people? Boaz is the shofet, so he's the Gadol Hador. And what is going on over here? Just, I suppose, to join the dots and to connect the pieces, every aspect of the lineage of Moshiach is problematic. Let's remember the earlier story. On one side, David's dynasty comes from the story of Yehuda and Tamar, very, very problematic story, in which Yehuda encounters Tamar in the Parshas Derachim, Tamar sitting by the crossroads, and that's one side. On another side, Naomi is proposing to Rus something that could be understood and be not too dissimilar, to go and encounter Boaz. And that's all on the father's side. And on the mother's side, they're born from Moav and Ammon, who have halachic problems as to whether they are even allowed to marry into the Jewish people. We paskin the ladies, the women of Ammon and Moav are allowed to, but that's up for debate, as we'll see. And Ammon and Moav themselves descends from the encounter of Lot and his daughters, which obviously is also profoundly problematic yichus. So all of this in the bigger meta picture is really part of what Mashiach is about. That if Mashiach is to bring everything back and to reconnect everything, he's bringing everything back from the just within halacha, but the most impure behavior imaginable, back and reconnecting that to Kedusha. And on some level, some of that also is what's playing out over here. Now, if we can open our psukim, let's turn to Pasuk Gimel, Pasuk 3. So we looked, I think, last week at we're on Perek base pasuk 3. We looked last week at the introduction to the story. I just want to highlight one word, which is when Rus turns up at Boaz's field, it describes it as Vayikar Mikra Chelkas Asad Levoz Hashem Mishpachas Melech. Rus happens to find herself by Mikra turning up at Boaz's field. Now, Mikra, the root of which is keri, kof, reish, yud, is not a great word in Hebrew, in Jewish thinking. She happenstance turned up at Boaz's field, and Chazal pick up on this word, by the way. They explicitly pick up on this word. Where do we find this word? Well, we found it last week, in convenient timing, in Parshas B'chakosai, where it's used to describe the non-reading of history that occurs when things happen and we don't recognize Yad Hashem in it. You went with me, Bekeri. You went with me with this philosophy of coincidence. I will also go with you with coincidence. So it refers to coincidence. It's the famous language used with Amalek, Asher korcha b'derech, they happens upon you on the way. It's linked probably to the word kar, which means cold. So it's non-relationship, non-joining of the dots, non-connectivity. When you're not reading history right, you're not connecting the dots. So you're not seeing a pattern, and you just think it's coincidence. It also refers to non-relationship. If you went with me, Bekeri, when Hashem says that to the Jewish people, I will go with the Bekeri, it means non-relationship. We'll have a cold, we'll have a cold. If you don't want a relationship, fine, so it'll be cold between us, fine. It'll be a lack of connection. It's also a specialist word used for a non-relationship relationship, a casual fling, a non-connecting type of disconnect. That's what the word means in Lashon HaKodesh. It's used in Lashon HaKodesh for non-connecting. So Rus is turning up at the field of Boaz, and she happens to turn up there, and Chazal reads into it this very thought. And they say that there's a potential here for non-connection going on. Rus is a single girl going out into the fields to gather. She's collecting amongst the lads. Boaz herself is going to respond to her. We don't have time to go through all the psukim. No, you should hang around with the na'aros, with the girls, not with the boys. She's going to suggest this relationship to Boaz of Yibum. Naomi is going to tell her to do it, which could be non-connection. Of course, we know the end of the story, that Chas v'Shalom, none of this occurs. In fact, what happens is a very deep, profound connection, because I'll pick up on this nuance over here of what's going on could be a very great disconnect. Okay, we move on. Pasuk 4 we looked at already of Arach of Hashem, and we spoke about the Chiddush of Boaz. He's going to be a revolutionary. He's going to get things back to the way they are. We see that Naomi is not treated very nicely by the people around, and Boaz, however, praises her. Pasuk 11, Vayan Boaz Vayomela, Hugad li kol asher asisas chamesach. I know about you. I know how Tazef Avich ve'imech ve'eretz meladatech. You did your own lech lecha. You stayed loyal. Yeshanim Hashem pa'alech. Pasuk 12. Hashem will reward you. All very, very, very famous psukim, and we sort of ran through them to some degree last time. Now we get to a pasuk that we touched upon, but we didn't focus on. This is pasuk 20. So Rus has come back, and Naomi is now going to propose to Rus. Maybe Boaz will be a goyel, and if he is a goyel, I'm going to call upon you to do something very, very difficult, which is yibum. And we saw already, yibum is going to involve you sacrificing yourself to a considerable degree, because you will be the mother, but really you'll be carrying the child, my continuation. As we indeed see at the end of the story, when the child is born, everyone says this is a child is born to Naomi. To do yibum is no simple thing, and we're going to analyze now a little bit more about how complicated yibum is. But that's what you're being called upon to do. That's what Naomi says to Rus. Yes.
Continuation. I mean, Mary was Elimelech's wife, and Boaz is a relative of Elimelech. So
yes.
Surprisingly, wasn't called the son of Elimelech rather than the rather than the son of Mary.
You are correct. Naomi is so identified with Eshes Elimelech that what she's really saying is, it's my job to continue Elimelech's family. I can't do it myself. My only way to do it is through you. But what you'll really be doing is acting on my behalf. That's correct. Yes. Yeah. By the way, we find others who fail in this mission of Yibum. They're not interested in bringing other people's children into the world. In the more classic model of Yibum, who is that who we find fail in this? This is Playing Harmonium in our story is going to fail. He's not going to be interested in this. But again, let's go back to the original story. We have the Er and Onain, who are the sons of Yehuda. They marry Tamar as an act of Yibum, and they choose not to bring children into the world. And eventually they die as a result of this. And Yehuda ends up bringing the continuation of life through Tamar into the story. Tamar, by the way, makes a feature, an appearance in this, in the Megillah, right at the end, when we're reminded of Boaz's ancestry, that this child born is a descendant of, it goes back in time and forward in time. It goes back to Yehuda and Tamar and Peretz and Zerach, the children of Yehuda. And then, right, we're looking at the last psukim, which we may or may not get to today. And it goes forward in time all the way through to David HaMelech. So we find already in Jewish history those who don't want to do Yibum. And Chazal speculate on the reason why the sons of Yehuda don't want to do this Yibum. And they say, look, we've got a lovely marriage, we've got a beautiful wife. Why should we bring children into the world on behalf of, anyway, then it's not even going to be our children. These will be an act of Yibum. So this is a challenge. Okay, so Pasuk Kav, Vatomer Naomi the Kalosa. Naomi says to her daughter-in-law, Baruch Hashem Hashem hasn't abandoned kindness to the living and the dead. In other words, we're going to do here chesed to the living and a chesed to the dead by arranging the Geula. I don't have time to go through the psukim in detail, in textual detail, but Rus here is suddenly referred to as Kalosa. Till now, Naomi has slipped out of calling her Kalosa and has called her Biti, my daughter, or just Rusa Moravia. She now goes back to being a daughter-in-law. Kalosa. Why is she back to being a daughter-in-law? Because suddenly Naomi is again shifting how she's viewing Rus, and she's saying, actually, you're still daughter-in-law. You're still responsible to my sons, your husbands, to carry the family on. In fact, even though this isn't a technical halachic yibum because the distance is too remote, in a real yibum, in which a woman is widowed without having children, and there is a brother of her husband still alive, she's still somewhat married to this marriage, because she can't get married to anyone else until a type of either yibum is performed, either marriage is continued through the brother, or chalitza is performed, which is a type of divorce in the sense that it's breaking of a relationship. We're not going to learn the whole of Masechet Yevamos now, but the technical term for that is zikol yibum. There's still an attachment to I'll come to in a second, there's still an attachment to the brother-in-law. Rus isn't technically yibum because it's a further relationship. It's a cousin, but she's saying Kalosa, you've still got a duty to your husband, which is when you marry, when a man and woman agree to marry, they are agreeing not just to the marriage, but also that the wife has responsibility to the husband if he predeceases her in a childless manner. So this is La Kalosa. This is what Naomi is really saying to us. You're still my daughter-in-law. You've still got responsibilities. Sorry. Yes.
That encouraged her to go back, or let her go back because she's still getting married to her son who should be continuing on the.
So, first of all, it seems that Naomi originally didn't believe in the possibility of Yibum. She thought this was irreparable. And if you remember the Psukim, she has this bizarre conversation to Rus and Arpan. She says, are you hanging around so that I can have children? Do you think, even if I could have children, which anyway isn't going to happen, it's going to be 20 years' time till you can marry them or not? And it seems almost surreal in the conversation that she's turning to them. It's almost egocentric. Like, you must be hanging around because you want to marry my children. It went so well last time, after all, that you must be waiting for my next children. But that's ridiculous. And one of the ways we suggested reasoning this was, she was saying to them, if you think this is about Yibum, forget it. Yibum's not going to happen. It's a non-starter. And the second thing this may tie into is to what degree Rus and Arpa were really married to Machlon and Gideon. And that gets into the discussion of exactly when the Megillas took place. And there is not an easy resolution to that. And it may be that somehow, if Orpah chooses to leave, she's revealing that she never really was a Gioris, in which case the marriage never really was a marriage. Whereas if Rus is choosing to stay, she's somehow revealing that there was some level of connection, and therefore Yibum is possible. But this remains one of the core mysteries at the heart of the Megillah. What was their genuine relationship between Rus and her husband, or not? To what degree was she? On the one hand, we learn from Naomi trying to push them away that the halachas of Geirus. On the other hand, if there is some form of Yibum taking place here, it seems there is some type of genuine connection. Let's go on though and explore now. Excuse me. Explore now Boaz's Rus's message to Naomi, and we're now in Perek Gimel, I think pasuk base. So she says to Naomi, "We know Boaz," and sorry, she says to Rus, "We know Boaz," and I have a suggestion for you. Now, there are two halachic problems with the concept of Boaz doing Yibum with Rus. And here we're going to start off with a dry, technical, legalistic point. And out of that, hopefully, will emerge a more profound thought, which is that, first of all, Yibum is a difficult mitzvah to perform. I think we mentioned last time, this time I mentioned it involves a sacrifice of self. That's challenge number one. Challenge number two is it has to be done, or for it to be done at its best, it has to be done lishma, it has to be done sincerely. We don't do Yibum anymore because it's not a mitzvah that can be done if one doesn't understand it, if one doesn't relate to it, if there's ulterior motives. So there's a conceptual challenge in Yibum. It's a difficult mitzvah to perform. It's one of the few mitzvahs where you have a choice whether to do it or not. And the Torah presents a lechatchila and a b'diavad and says you have to know yourself whether you're up to this mitzvah or not. It's a mitzvah that involves a choice, and we'll come back to this later. But once chosen, in a sense, the marriage is not a choice because it doesn't involve a new act of kedushin. The Yibum is somehow transferring the previous marriage to the new parties. So it's an interesting thing in which I'm choosing to put myself in place of the previous married husband, that the brother who's stepping forward to do the Yibum is choosing to put themselves in their place and thus to adopt almost the mantle of that marriage, in which case it's not a choice, it's something imposed on them. Very, very interesting sort of balance, and we'll visit that in depth. Linked to that is challenge number one halachically, which is the Gemara in Yevamos, and the Gemara in Yevamos says, don't create Yibum between a young wife and a much older husband. That's not going to be a appropriate match, and yet that's exactly what Rus and Boaz are going to do. Boaz, who at least according to Chazal is very elderly by this stage, is going to marry Rus in this relationship, or that's the suggestion. The final problem is going to be that the whole relationship is halachically perhaps problematic because she's a Moaviyah, and who says a Moaviyah can marry into the Jewish people? More complicated still is that who is this Shida going to go to? Who's going to have to paskin this Shida about whether a Moaviyah can marry into the Jewish people? Well, the answer is the Posek Kadar, who's going to be Boaz. I mean, that's the continuation of the story. So Boaz is going to have to produce a halacha, if that's what he believes, in which he's going to have to paskin that he's able to marry. So there's intertwining problems over here. And Naomi's solution to this is, and there's a genius twist, by the way, in the plot, which is often missed, which we'll get to in a few minutes. So Naomi's first solution to this is, she says, you have to indicate to Boaz that you're ready for this. And the way she says to do this is to dress up and go to encounter Boaz. Now, halachically, if this is a Yibum, actually this is okay. Boaz doesn't take forward the Yibum in this manner, and Boaz says, stay here, and tomorrow we'll sort this out in Beis Din. But technically, since Yibum means the miyabim, the active partner, the husband who's stepping forward, or potential husband, Boaz in this case, who's stepping forward to continue Machlan and Chilion or Elimelech's family, is adopting the marriage that pre-exists. Yibum doesn't need a formal process of chuppah and kedushin. It merely means Boaz slipping in to the role. In fact, this isn't what happens, and they have a chuppah, they have a proper marriage, because Boaz isn't a full yibum. He's too distantly removed. But the concept, the thinking that Naomi is going through, in which it says this isn't a terrible breach of tznius, is that in true yibum, the whole point is that this is a continuation in some respects of a pre-existing marriage, and a halacha l'maisa yibum doesn't need the normal vehicle of hurry up with kadeshes and a ring and a chuppah and so on. It's merely a continuation of the marital life, which creates the yibum option. So Naomi says to Rus, I need you to go to Boaz and get dressed for your wedding. This is what's going on. I need you to indicate that this is what you want to do. This is what you're happy to do. So yes. In Naomi's thinking, from a halachic point of view, they're not yet married. But were they to do yibum, then they would be married. Now, normally, entering into a relationship without the halachic structure of kedushin and chuppah is a complete breach of kedusha, of sanctity, and of appropriate boundaries. Boaz, in Naomi's thinking, were Boaz to be a true miyabim, it would be the one example actually where this isn't the case, because if he chooses to adopt the mantle of yibum, then it isn't a recreation of a new marriage. It's opting into, in some way, a continuation of the previous marriage, and indeed, then this is an appropriate way of continuing the marriage. Now, it's a little bit difficult here because this isn't a real yibum that would be going on over here. The relationship is too removed. Nonetheless, this seems to be what Naomi's thinking is. She's saying to Rus, you have to be the active partner here. We will revisit this paradox a little bit later, because it is very clear, it's very, very clear in the Psukim, when you look at the Psukim in the Torah that describe Yibum, the Yavama is the active partner over here. So on the one hand, she is committed to her husband's memory, and in a sense has an obligation to allow Yibum to occur, and ostensibly it's the male, the Yobam, the brother, who has the choice, does he want to do Yibum or does he want to do Chalitza? And yet when you look in the Psukim that describe Yibum, it's the Yavama that approaches the gates. The gates is where the Sanhedrin sits. She approaches the basin and says, I want Yibum to occur. And Naomi is basically telling Rus to do a similar thing. She says, you need to be the active partner over here. So yes. Yeah.
We have been something that Boaz is not the nearest to the dead inside the car.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Naomi also knew this, it was kind of well known. And this whole encounter piece is not with the above, because it would only be when someone rejects this desire, then it passes him. So at the moment, it's really nothing at all. It's not even a sort of a type of view, it's nothing.
Okay, so just for those online, Neil is asking, well, 1 minute, we know there is a Pliny Almoni there, and he's really the first choice to be the goyal. So we will visit the personality of Pliny Almoni later and understand why he is necessary in the story. Why do you need another figure who could have done the goyal but chooses not to, and then Boaz is the one that steps in? All I will say for now is that in Rus's thinking, this isn't the case. She seems oblivious to Naomi's thinking, she seems oblivious to the precedence of Pliny Almoni. Indeed, this is what Boaz says to Rus when he encounters her in the granary at night. He says to her, I'm willing to go for this yibum, but we can't because Pliny Almoni is still around. So Naomi has read the story of Rus encountering Boaz in the field, and she says that this is divine intervention. This is HaKadosh Baruch Hu sorting things out. Clearly, this is the route to Yibum, and she isn't concerned about the existence of a preceding goyal. Okay, I just want to whiz through some of the Kriyok sivs in these Pesukim, because they really very beautifully bring out how Naomi is seeing herself as the one really who's doing the Yibum over here. She's continuing Elimelech's marriage. Just have a look at Pasuk Gimel. V'rachat v'sacht v'sam simlo seich. So she says, or the pasuk before that, pasuk hey, she says, Hinehu zoras goren asorim alayla. He's going to be winnowing barley on the threshing floor tonight, and he's going to be there. V'rachat v'sacht v'sam simlo seich. you will wash and anoint yourself and dress up. Now the reading is similar. Your the plural, your dresses. The writing is similar. Your dress. In other words, what she's saying is you're going to be wearing two clothes tonight. You're going to be wearing two mantles. You're going to be wearing your own role, and you're also going to be carrying someone else with me. And this becomes clearer in the continuation. Look what it says. V'yoradet hagoren, you will go down to the granary. But what's the written? V'yoradeti, I will go down to the granary. Then pasuk daled. You will uncover his feet. V'shachavd, and you will lie there. But who's going to really lie there? What's again the Greek? V'shachav ti, I will lie there. So you see so beautifully in the psukim how Naomi is speaking about herself. She's saying you're going to be the one physically doing this, but really it's my dress that's going to be put on, and I'm going to go down, and I'm going to lie there at his feet. So this is what we're talking about in the Yibam. By the way, when Rus responds, she uses a similar device. Pasuk Hey, Vatome Elea, Rus responds to her, Kol asher tomi asa. Everything you say, I will do. The Kriya is Kol asher tomi elai asa. Everything you say to me, I will do. But the Ksiv doesn't have this elai, doesn't have the me. And as Naomi, Rus is saying, I'm cutting myself out of this. Everything that you're saying, I'll do. I realize everything you're saying to me, I will do, but I understand I'm invisible here. I understand I'm not really the critical player over here. I need to negate myself. Okay. What I'm trying to argue is that to do an act of geula, to restore a broken chain, or to restore people to a family to its place in Eretz Israel, and kal v'chomer, how much more so to be the progenitor of the real goyal, to be able to bring Moshiach there, to be the ancestor of Moshiach, to found the Davidic dynasty that's going to lead to Moshiach, there has to be a negation of self. We're learning another principle in what the Megillah is telling us. So we've learned that this is a Megillah of Chesed, but it's not just any Chesed, it's a Chesed that involves sacrifice. It doesn't involve unthinking sacrifice, but it involves a recognition of it's not just about me, there's a bigger picture over here. To tie this into other terms that we've seen about, this is Malchus. To be a Melech means to recognize that with the very pomp and wealth of kingship, you're actually becoming invisible. Because with all the regalia, the real person underneath disappears. You know, we're a country that still has a degree of Malchus. And we recognize that the glory of the queen was 50 years of service of actually being invisible. That she didn't let that much of her personality shine through, because that's the only way you can be a Melech. So with the power of Malchus also has to come a negation of self. I don't want to shift into another subject, but I spoke last week in the Thursday night share, the Lava series, which I'm doing on Omer. We spoke about the different spheres, and I spoke this week is the last week of Omer is the sphere of Malchus. And Malchus really means that ability to apportion one's life and run one's life without self-interest, really. That's what this talking about. This is this disappearing a lie. By the way, there's two etymologies put forward for David, who is the archetype of kingship. He's the premier king. And one etymology is that the word comes from dud, which means a pot, an empty container. Rosh Hashanah speaks about that when he speaks about the clash between Gog, that we read on Sukkot of all festivals, between the kingship of Gog and Magog. Gog, of course, is the name of the enemy king who's attacking the Jewish people before the coming of Moshiach. Gog means Gog. Gog is a roof. This is on Sukkot when we are ruthless, not ruthless, but roofless. This is on Sukkot. And he contrasts this with David, who is this pot, this empty container. So David has to have the quality of being an empty container. He has to remove from himself any self-interest, as Rus needs to do this. The other meaning of the word David, also a lover, beloved, yeah. And it's telling us now something about love. That true love has to balance this paradox. And here we begin getting to the next layer of depth in this whole Megillah. True love has to balance this paradox between transcendence of I'm there for you, I'm not thinking about myself, and paradoxically, in emptying myself of that, I'm most fulfilling myself and most able to be myself. So there's a relationship. In a relationship, you actualize yourself by transcending yourself, by thinking about another and removing one's own self-interest from the equation. Is how one allows oneself actually to become one with someone else, and through that achieve continuity and future and the like. So this is the paradox of this name of David and the emergence of Moshiach from this. And here again, we're getting back to the themes that we met in the Megillah, how building chesed is and yibum, which is a chesed shel emes, if you want to call it that, an ultimate chesed of we saw the language that Naomi said earlier, that he'll do for us chesed for the living and for the dead. And yet that's the very way of restoring malchus, kingship, to the Jewish people. And this really, again, I just again want to connect this to yibum, is the balancing act between a yibum, which is an act, a chosen act of non-choice, a chosen act of being forced. Because in doing yibum, you are voluntarily accepting that this is actually a continuation of the pre-existing marriage, of something about which I have no option to do. It is clear later on in the Megillah that Rus and Boaz indeed love each other. That is what emerges in the story. At the end of the story, when Rus and Boaz get married, they are given their names, very contrasting with the marriage at the beginning of the story, which, if you remember, many weeks ago when we began our journey of learning Rus, right in the first few pasukim, they were nameless, right? Remember the first few pasukim of the Megillah, in which this funny phraseology, read for me the pasuk, Neil. Right, etc. So it's Isha, so it's anonymous. When we get to the end of the Megillah, they're going to have a real relationship. So let me phrase this differently. Boaz and Rus are experiencing that a true relationship needs to have a commitment. It needs to feel forced, meaning you have to feel you have no choice. And in feeling you have no choice, that's where the maximum expression of self ultimately comes. That's where true love can lie. In other words, true love can only lie in a commitment. In if it's a relationship to parents, it's if it's a relationship to spouse, it's the commitment of a spousal relationship. Any relationship we have to community, to siblings, and any relationship we have, there's a part of us that has to understand that we have no choice. This is the way it has to be. That there isn't an option. This is an obligation. And yet the obligation is to extend myself, to transcend myself, to go beyond myself. Only with, we often think about commitment as being necessary in a relationship because that's what allows us to get through the hard times. That's what forces us to put the investment into the relationship in order to continue. Emotions go up and down. All of that is true, but there's something more profound than that, which is if I'm really removing myself from the picture and it's really about you, then I understand that I have no choice because it's about you. It's not about me. So love can only be found in this doid, in this emptyingness that David experiences himself, and the Eli, that's the invisible Eli of a Rus. And in that sense, Yibum is the spitz, the peak of a marriage, because it's an unchosen entry into marriage, as opposed to a regular marriage in which we choose to enter into the marriage, and once we have that, we then have the commitment. But all marriage has to have that commitment. Are you with me here? Is this making sense? We're going to. I'm going to tie it in a little bit later to Shavuos and to a bigger picture here, and I'm going to tie it in because the Megillah ties it in a very, very interesting way. But all I will say now is let's pause for a few moments and think about very different relationship building. And this is an idea from the Maharal. And the Maharal looks at the acceptance of the Torah, about which we say Na'aseh v'nishma. And then he says, the Chazal, of Kof Aleim HaKegigis, that the mountain is suspended over them, and they're told either accept the Torah or Shomtei Karasam, there you will be buried. And the Maharal, in an amazingly beautiful piece, from which I'm getting this thought I'm now sharing, says that a true relationship has to be voluntarily entered into, Na'aseh v'nishma, but the voluntary entering into it is from a sensation of, I have no choice, this is just inevitable. This is so meant to be, this is so right, that clearly this is what's meant to happen. If you only have the forced aspects of Matan Torah, that's not a relationship between us and Hashem. But if it's me choosing to accept Torah, then it's about me. There's a me there. And there's a lack of a complete transcendence, a complete entering into the relationship. So what you have to experience is, I have no choice. The Jewish people are so overwhelmed. The Maharal takes this metaphor of the mountain being suspended as a metaphor. They're so overwhelmed with an awareness of the love of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the miracles and the Nisim that he's done when they've taken Egypt, the power of his Anochi Hashem Elokecha, the way he's running the world, the way he's in control of everything, that they say, this is obvious. This is so blindingly obvious that we don't really have a choice but to enter into this. So there's a parallel going on, in a sense, over here in this relationship that Rus is entering into with Boaz, and she's negating herself in the process. Someone's posted a question here. This is Nomi's act of Yibum through Rus, but surely Nomi had no need for Yibum. Any man died with his son still alive. Rus was the one with Hachiv of Yibum. Husband died in Nosy. So again, I want to emphasize, this isn't a pure halachic Yibum. Boaz is too distant from Rus to do a pure Yibum. He's a cousin, he's not a sibling. And correctly, Elimelech has children. But the concept of Yibum is applying over here, in that Elimelech's children die without progeny of themselves, and therefore Elimelech's chain is broken, and this is a continuation of this. So this is not a literal halachic yibum, but this is in line with the values of Torah. It's very interesting. We have mitzvahs that reflect values and mitzvahs that we don't really see how they reflect values. We understand that chesed is a value. So even though I may say to you, okay, technically I'm not obliged to do chesed to this person, but nonetheless, if chesed informs our values, I'll try and do chesed to that. None of us have an issue with it. None of us read and sharpness a value. So when it comes to chesed, we understand the value that lies behind it, and therefore, even though you may ask a shaila from a Rav, don't I have to do that because it may be important for you to know the exact boundaries? Sometimes you'll say, I don't care about the halachic responsibility. I know I'm not mechuyev to. I want to do it because I understand that chesed is meant to mold me into a different sort of person. We don't think of Yibum like that. We think that Yibum is a sharpness type halacha. Right? It's a chayk. If you have to do it, you do it. If you don't, you don't. But it's clear from the message of the story of Yehuda and Tamar, and it's clear from the whole of Megillas Rus, that it does represent a value. That being able to continue the chain of Masorah, being able to continue the family lineage, being able to continue the connection to Eretz Yisrael is essential. And this feeds in to the next dynamic of the story. Because Boaz says to Rus, I would love to move ahead with this Yibum, but I can't. There's another goyal over there. And the next scene is remarkable because it involves a number of intertwining elements. The first element is there's a halachic discussion that takes place that needs to be paskened by the Gadol Hadar about the reliability of a Masorah and a Svara and a Drasha that says a Moyavi shouldn't enter into the Jewish people, but a Moyavia can. And it's a whole sugya. It's not a clear drasha. It's not a clear diuk. In many cases, the Torah uses the male form and means both the male and the female. And there's a tradition, but the tradition isn't so clear-cut over here. It's a very difficult sugya. Now, Boaz finds himself in the following paradoxical situation. He can only argue for the halacha as the Gadol Hadar and not recuse himself from the situation because there is a Ploni Almoni there who's the real goyal. And here the wonder of having a Ploni Almoni there. The tradition, and we need to ask ourselves, why is it set up like this? But there's an irony over here. The very Masorah and the very person who is competent to pasken the halacha about this marriage is the very figure who can't because they are the potential party in this case. So why would that be? We need to get back to that. Why would it be that the Masorah of this whole area of halacha is coming from the very individual who's the only one qualified to, almost the only one qualified, to do Yibum? And then how do we deal with this? Because we're now stuck in a paradox. Because if the only one qualified to give the psak is the one who can't give the psak because they're the only party, then we're stuck. So there's a Ploni Almoni in the story. And Boaz finds himself having to give a psak for Ploni Almoni, and saying to Ploni Almoni, you are able to do Yibum, because I'm paskening, you're allowed to do this. And in paskening that, I'm acting in the most lishma manner possible, because we find Boaz trying to persuade Ploni Almoni to take on his role. He says to Ploni Almoni, you're the one who's meant to take on this role. It shouldn't be me. And if you do that, you will be the one that restores the family line and does this wonderful mitzvah of Geula, which I'm desperate to do. I would love to do this mitzvah of Geula. And maybe you're not, maybe he knows, maybe he doesn't know that out of this little act of Geula is going to emerge the ultimate Geula that will be the ancestors of Mashiach. Don't forget that it seems there's a sense within the family that they are going to be the ancestors of the kings. Elimelech is called Elimelech, to me is the king. And in a sense, he is the ancestor of David, just not in the literal way because he messes up, but in the Yibum type way because his marriage has continued through an army and the child that's born. So Eli Melech, to me, is the king. So Boaz definitely wants to do the mitzvah of Geula in the most local form. He says that to us. Maybe he understands it's something bigger going on also. Maybe not. We don't know entirely. But he's the leader of the generation. Maybe he's reading history and understanding what's happening. And he finds himself having to argue to the best of his ability to the Ploni Almoni, no, go into the mitzvah. This is mutter for you to do. But with this model in place, it allows us to end up to have our cake and eat it. To have the very person who restores the Masorah to Klal Yisrael as being the very person who restores the lineage to the family of Elimelech and Naomi and Ruth and keeps things going. And again, Moshiach has to be born to a restoration of Masorah. In the same way as the chain has to be reattached and we need to return to Eretz Yisrael, and in the same way as the Yibum needs to take place and we need to return the family connection, and in the same way as the lost souls of the Gerim who are there at Har Sinai but have dropped out of the Jewish people need to be brought back into the Jewish people, which is why Rusa de Gioras has to be the progenitor of Moshiach. So we need everything coming together. Similarly, the Masorah of Torah has to be restored, and therefore in the very act of the Yibum taking place between a Boaz and a Rus, you have a restoration of a near lost halacha of Moyavi Veloy Moyavia. So there's a restoration of a piece of Torah in the same way as there's a restoration of a piece of the family lineage and so on. Yes, you know.
I recall that although God appears to us from here, it wasn't accepted, or there was still a question mark.
Yes, we'll get to that. Yes, his psak is not entirely accepted. Yes, and we'll come to that in a minute. Yes.
So what we learned from this, that it's acceptable to marry a woman from Moab.
Yes.
Why do we have to learn that from this? Why can't we learn it differently?
Okay, so I've spoken about a general point, which is the restoration of Torah through this. But there's other layers to this, and you're 100% right. It also means that the lineage of Mashiach is coming from a figure who's as far removed as it's possible to be part of the Jewish people, and yet still able to be part of the Jewish people. And again, that has to be where Mashiach comes from. So it's a figure from the one group of people that can't join the Jewish people, but just Moyaviyah can get in. So it's on the edge. It also is that the chain and the lineage of Mashiach can only be accepted through the Chachma of Torah Shebal Peh. In other words, human svara and our continuation of the Masorah, whether halacha Moshe Sinai or svara or drasha, it's not entirely clear which halachic mechanism is at work here, is the route through which Mashiach can come. And this is obvious, this has to be the case. Because if Torah is given to us from above, that's Shavuos, but now it's about how we receive Torah, our fidelity in the reception of Torah. It also has to be Moav that's coming back, because it's the restoration of Sodom and Lot and that broken, ruptured relationship that we saw where Lot and Avram are Hipporid, they separate, and this is the Preda, the separation, returning to the fold, which is the return of Rus and so on. So there's all these interweaving layers over here. If you like, I'm arguing there's a parallel between the following elements. The compulsion of Har Sinai versus the Naasev and Ishma, that's one relationship. The compulsion of Yibum versus the voluntary acceptance of Yibum, which the Yavama Rus undergoes. The compulsion of Geula and the voluntary acceptance of Boaz to engage in that. The compulsion of Torah Shebichsav and the voluntary acceptance of Klal Yisrael, the Jewish people, to engage in Torah Shebal Peh. And in all of them, you have this paradox that in the process of us accepting that which is beyond us, emptying ourselves, removing the Eli, we actualize ourselves by transcending ourselves. That's the parallel that's going on. And then, of course, the final parallel then, this is the fullness of the Melech, the compulsion of being Melech, only achieved by the emptiness that a David HaMelech can achieve. So these are the ratios, the proportionalities that really the Megillah is emerging and bringing out. Interestingly, by the way, the Rambam says about Moshiach that his job will be to restore halachas. he describes Mashiach as Chacham Yosem Shlomo, wiser than Shlomo, and almost as great a Novi as Moshe Rabbeinu. So he's not as great a Novi as Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu is the Novi par excellence, the Makabel Torah, but Mashiach is almost as great a Novi as Moshe, and he's a Chacham more than Shlomo. So Mashiach's role is amongst other things, also to be the Posek Hadar, to do this job that Boaz is doing of restoring halacha to Klal Yisrael. Let's just maybe just to conclude with just a couple of beautiful diyukim, and we're running out of time. I'm just going to make a few more small points, and I hope that out of this has emerged a reasonably coherent idea. I'm conscious every time I talk about emptying oneself, removing the Eli in the transcendence of a relationship, that there is a potential danger in this. You can leave yourself vulnerable, leave yourself open to abuse, right? It can be a dangerous message in a relationship. Maybe the worst thing to say to someone in a relationship is remove your sense of self. It doesn't mean that. First of all, hopefully it's not an abusive relationship, but it doesn't mean that also. And we see a very beautiful example of this in Pasuk Vav, Vateret Hagorin, Vatask Cholash Sifta Chamosa, which Chazal comments on this. Everyone with me in the Pasuk? Pasuk Vav, Pasuk 6. Yeah. What period are we now on period Gimel, Pasuk Vav? Vateret Hagorin, Vatask Cholash Sifta Chamosa. She went down to the Goren, she did everything that her mother-in-law asked of her. Chazal pick up on their beautiful reading of nuance of Psukim. She did like all that her mother-in-law told her, but not everything that her mother-in-law told her. And Chazal comments on this, that her mother-in-law said, dress up beautifully and go down to the Goren. And Rus replied, that's crazy, that's not safe. I'm not going to go out in the night dressed up beautifully. I'm going to go down to the Goren, and there I will dress up and await Boaz's hide there and await Boaz's arrival. So on a practical level, that means that even though she's removed the Eli and she's recognizing I'm doing everything that my mother-in-law has told me to do, nonetheless she's still thinking, she's still reasoning, she does everything. In my mind I was thinking this sounds a bit like the story with Betzalel and Moshe and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Betzalel is given the job of building the Mishkan. He's told, as he understands the instructions, build a Kalim and build a Mishkan. Betzalel says that's inappropriate. That's a breach of Kovod and Sineas. First, I need to build the Mishkan, the housing, and then I can build the Kalim inside the housing. And this is why he's referred to as Betzalel Kel. He's in the shadow of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because he's actually understood something better than it was said. He's understood what this really means. So that's a classic story. Here you have Rus in some shape or form doing a sort of parallel thing almost. Naomi says to her, get dressed and then go inside the Goren. And Rus replies, that would be a breach of Sineas. Some things shouldn't be outside. They should be inside. I'm going to go inside the Goren and then I'm going to get dressed. Okay, so that's just a very brief aside. Let me just try and mention a couple more highlights of Psukim and then we will stop. Let's jump to the final to Dalet, I'm sorry. We now get to the core encounter, which we've already somewhat described, where Boaz finds himself trying to persuade his, in inverted commas, rival, Ploni Almoni, to marry Rus, and tells him, no, you can trust the Masorah. I'm telling you, as the Baal Masorah of the generation, the Posek of the generation, this is a legitimate marriage. So the girl is described as passing. Just for your information, a couple of interesting things. Pasuk 2, Vayikach Asora Noshim Eziknei Ha'eh, Vayomesh Rupo Vayeshu. He takes 10 people from elders of the city. What's the stint of having 10 people? Why do you need a minion for what's going on overhead? The Gemara learns that whenever a new halacha is going to be taught, one needs a minion there. It's not enough to have a regular beis din, because this new halacha has to be publicized. So Boaz is going to be revealing a new halacha. Why, interwoven into the story of Rus and her family and Yibum and the founding of Malchus, do we need halachas about spreading new halachas and bati din, dealing with drashas of Moav and Moaviyah and everything else? as we explained, because intertwined into the story, there's a parallel over here. Humans stepping forward and saying to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you gave us the Torah, and we're now going to receive it and carry it and reason with it and think with it and like Pastoral and like Rus, understand what we have to do, but also understand how to apply it. This is very much the story of the whole. This is very much essential to the whole story. It is only by us saying, I am a loyal adherent to the Masorah, and I'm now carrying on my understanding, whether through my own drasha or through my tradition that I've received of Moaviv, velo Moavia, that a Moabite can marry into the Jewish people. Only through that is he repairing these broken links that need repairing. He's not just reconnecting the family, but he's reconnecting Torah in so doing, and he's doing a halachic process. Ploni Almoni doesn't live up to that. He says, Anochi a girl, I will, but then he refuses to marry. The language of Ploni Almoni, by the way, is very interesting, and maybe with this we'll head towards concluding. Ploni Almoni answers, and he says, Pen ashkes es zari, I'm afraid that I will damage my children. In other words, he says to Boaz, I accept that this is how you are paskening the halacha, but how do I know that future generations will pasken like this? And Neil, this is the point that you made, that indeed in the future, Ploni Almoni's Boaz's pasuk is challenged, is questioned, and therefore the Goyal is saying, I'm happy to do it, but I don't have trust in the authenticity or the reliability of the Masorah, and therefore I'm worried that in future years this Masorah will be lost, and my child will end up as excluded from the Jewish people. Pasuk 6, Vayoma HaGoyal, the Goyal says, Lo uchol ligol, I can't engage in this Goyala, pen ashkes es nachlosi, lest my inheritance, my future, becomes destroyed. A couple of languages over here. Lo uchol, I'm unable. He sees himself as passive. He doesn't have this others of Boaz that he sees himself as an active player. He sees himself as unable to respond, number one. And number two, he says, I accept your pasuk, but I can't remove myself from the equation in the way that Rus and Boaz are able to do, and therefore I'm worried that I will end up damaged. We've arrived at the end of the time that we have available, so just looking in the final chapter, we arrive at the birth of the excitement that everyone has. Sorry, not the final chapter. It's the continuation of this. Pasuk Yud Aleph, Yitin Hashem es Isha Habayil Beisecha Karochel Ukaleya. Chazal pick up on this, that this is another repair happening. These are the people of Beis Lechem talking. They are from Shevet Yehuda. They are descendants of Leah, and yet they're recognizing that the bracha should be like Rachel and Leah. They're putting Rachel first. In other words, they're healing the breach that took place between the descendants of Rachel and Leah. Pasuk 12, the Beis Beis Peretz Asher Yolda Tamar the Yehuda. Your house should be like the house of Peretz that Tamar bore to Yehuda. Tamar, who we mentioned, was the previous Yibum that took place. In this book, this was not my own idea, in this book he suggests that the etymology of Tamar may be linked to Mar that we met earlier, bitterness, but also Mar as an exchanged. Do you remember that when Naomi spoke to the people and she said, don't call me Naomi, but call me Mara, one of the suggestions was the word Tamura, which means to exchange. I had my own thoughts about this because a Tamar is a palm tree. And what's an interesting feature of a palm tree is that every year the lulavim grow out, and the palm tree looks a bit like a pineapple at the bottom. It's got this sort of stubbly trunk. The reason for that is because the branches grow out, the branches die off, and they become part of the height of the tree for the next year. So the Tamar has this interchangeability, this replacement, that every year what was the growth of last year becomes the replacement of next year. This, by the way, is possibly the pshat in Tzadik Katama Yifrach that we sing when we say Mizmor Sheni Shabbos. We say B'frach L'shoim K'mo Esav. The difference between the unsuccessful person and the wicked person is they flourish like grass. They flourish, but then there's a setback, and the grass withers in winter, and then it grows again. It never gets anywhere. The Tamar also has a setback. Its branch breaks off, its branch dies, but that broken branch then becomes the foundation of the next bit of height that it has. So maybe this is the meaning of the word Tamar. This broken, ruptured chain is restored by the reversal of fortunes that's occurred. Yes, David, sorry.
You alluded to the centrality of Teresh Pet in the story. So,
yes.
I was once told that one that suggested why we read Rus
yes.
first, Because it shows Hashem gave us not just Torah Shabbat, but Torah
What I'm trying to argue is that all the suggestions given for the link between Rus and Shavuos actually are tying into this. One of the themes of Megillas Rus is the centrality of Torah Shabbat, absolutely. One of the themes of Rus is Chesed. One of the themes of Rus is Malchus. You hear all these sorts of vertelach, but why do we read Rus on Shavuos? Because David HaMelech was born and died on Shavuos. And this is about the birth of David HaMelech. But why is David HaMelech born and dies on Shavuos? What has David HaMelech, the king, got to do with Matan Torah, right? And why do we read the Megillah? Because of this coincidence of events. So what I've really been trying to do here is tie these things together. Again, just so I'm not plagiarizing, I had this series prepared before I started. Obviously, I thought about what I want to say, and these were some of the things I want to bring out. But this book has helped me bring it out in a far more powerful way than otherwise I would have been able to. And again, just to reference it before we conclude, Moshe Miller. Again, I don't know much about him, but I was gifted this book or shown this book when I was away and bought it. We'll finish here because I think we've run out of time. I hope this has given everyone a slightly fuller picture of Megillas Rus. I entitled the Megillah something around navigating transition or something like that. Yes, I hope this has shown that Megillas Rus is historically the transition between Shoftim and Malchus. But more importantly, in a sense, the transition between a broken world and a healed world. It's the book of Geula that we're reading, right? It's the book of restoration of Geula. It links Matan Torah to Moshiach. That's the role of David. It's the return, the reconnecting of a broken Masorah, the Psak of Boaz. It's the Geula of a broken family lineage, the Yibam of Boaz. It's the Geula of a broken link to Eretz Yisrael, the repurchasing of the fields that Boaz engages in. It's the return of the Jewish people sunk to a low level where Boaz has to introduce the use of the name of Hashem in common parlance. It's the return of a Jewish people who have become close to Sodom. They've become behaving like Sodom. It's the return of a family who are meant to be leaders of the Jewish people and go off to Moav. It's the return and restoration of the tragedy of the separation of Lot and Avraham and the Jewish people. And what we've learned is a book that if I had to conclude this, I would say that the nice, sweet pastoral story of Rus is the answer to how you heal a ruptured nation. If you want to heal a ruptured nation, where do we as simple people take all of this? We're not going to be doing Yibum, we're not Boazes, we're not Bali Masorah, and so on. Where we take this is it's the little act. It's the little act of chesed that Boaz does by feeding a Rus. It's the little act of chesed that a Rus does by accompanying her mother back to Nami. It's the little act of selfishness on the other side of an Elimelech leaving his homeland. That is a rupture and a break and potentially a permanent rupture in the continuity of the Jewish people. And the restoration, if you want to get a Melech back in Israel, it's the same old Torah message, really, that originally the Torah spoke about grand societies, a Dor HaMabul and a Dor HaFloga, and then it gets back to the story of families, right? The families are obvious. If you want to build a nation, if you want to build a kingdom, if you want to build a kingship, it's about the little acts of chesed, the little acts of restoration of family, the little acts of care, the little acts of not shirking duty, and I suppose in the context of Shuas, the little acts of Talmud Torah. We need to be carrying the Masorah with us. We need to be carrying Torah Sheba'al Peh if we're to carry our part of the deal, our part of the covenantal relationship that we're with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And finally, if you want to build love, if you want to build relationship, you need to feel compelled. You need to realize this is it. This is compelled. Doid, I'm empty. And then Doid, out of that one, can become a lover. That's on the small scale of a Boaz Rus relationship. And that's on the largest scale of David HaMelech, Mashiach, in relating to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I wish everyone a good evening, and thank you so much for bearing with me going over time today and what's been a lengthier series than I had imagined when I launched it. Yeah.
But that's the shortest Megillah. In some ways, it's the most amazing.
I hope every Megillah could become the most amazing, but I wanted to show what a beautiful Megillah it was. That was my aim and my goal and my ambition.
Thank you very much.
So the question was just asked was, how do we know that the Psak of Boaz was right? So really, it's part of a deeper question. How do we ever know that Torah Sheba'al Peh is right? And the answer is, by definition, it's right. Because if we understand this is a relationship, and it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu speaking, and it's how we receive and carry Torah Sheba'al Peh that defines Torah Sheba'al Peh, then Boaz's point to Ploni Almoni is, this is what I've paskened. I've done my job in what it means to be a transmitter of Torah. And the truth has to emerge from what we humans have of Torah, how we have received the Torah. It's a longer conversation, but this is Eilu Ve'elu Davidikim Chaim, this is Shivim Ponim Torah. What we hear, what I'm able to carry of Torah, is what we received of Torah. Therefore, that's our half of the relationship. In essence, it's answering that there's a balance here between the objective of Torah and the objective truth of Torah and the subjective truth of what we hear of Torah is what our part in the relationship is. It's what we've got of Torah, and it only becomes Torah when it's given from HaKadosh Baruch Hu to us as humans who receive it. That's what makes it into Torah. It's our receiving of it that makes it into Torah.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
And how did Naomi? She didn't know about Ploni, about Almoni.
Yeah, so someone asked me this question. I don't know is the answer. I don't know if Naomi didn't know about Ploni Almoni, or didn't understand about Ploni Almoni, or realized that it had to be the closest relative. It's not entirely clear actually why it had to be the closest relative either. So it seems Naomi thought that Boaz was going to be the Goel, and in fact she was right in the end. He was. But it seems she didn't. I don't know. She wasn't aware of Ploni Almoni as precedent. She thought that Rus could go and then do Yibum with Boaz.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm sorry to be
No. Good questions.
looking at you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Good to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.